I knew as early as February 2020 that I needed to do something.
I recognized that there was a systematic problem and that this was not about hydroxychloroquine, it was something larger.
Fear shut the world down, and people made a lot of money at it as they were killing us.
I was asked to speak at a freedom rally that was set up to discredit my reputation.
Whoever orchestrated this must not have the safety of this nation in mind.
Medicine and politics should be separated. These doctors were handcuffed.
The American public has awakened. We have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights, and we're going to hold them accountable.
It is a natural progression of a man of God or woman of character to see injustice, to seek it out, and then to act upon it.
Do you hear me? We will never lock down again. This is the hill we die on.
Don't miss New American Heroes with attorney Warner Mendenhall and John Davidson, Mondays on BrokenTruth.tv.
With Broken Truth, I am John Davidson, sort of here. Temporary traveling mode, so forgive me for some of the less than stellar broadcast production, no lights and things like that. But I've got my good buddy Warner Mendenhall from Freedom Counsel and Mendenhall Law Firm. Welcome, Warner.
Welcome. And we have some issues with things being broken today.
Yeah.
We had an esteemed guest who were unable to technically to get that worked out. So we're just going to have a conversation, the two of us today.
Well, you know what? I find those to be the most fun anyway. Although, to be fair, this is not really a fun episode. This is the first time I've spoken publicly since Charlie's assassination. And I think what I would just want to say about that is I did not know Charlie personally. I know you'd been on his show. You guys knew each other, and a lot of my friends knew him. And as you know, despite not knowing him personally, I was very affected by it because, you know, Charlie has flooded everyone's social media for the last 5 years. He has spoken out for the unborn. He's spoken out for women. He's spoken out for Christianity and faith and all of the principles that really our society was founded on. And it affected me because I understand, even on my smaller, not so very visible platform, the absolute fear and courage that it takes just to go out and say, hey, this is wrong. And in an audience that hates you, is not eager to hear it, and is very eager to silence you. So it's a devastating loss to our nation, to our movement of truth and freedom. But I'm grateful for everything that Charlie did, and he may ultimately have more influence in death than he had in life. And his widow was amazing. The memorial last night for him was so powerful. You know, God help the people that are against him right now, because a dragon or a giant has been awoken, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very worrisome development in a lot of ways. I mean, to use violence to silence people is absolutely the worst. It is a complete breakdown of humanity, basically. And, you know, whether you agreed or disagreed with Charlie Kirk on the issues that he was promoting, you have to give people space to talk in public and to express their First Amendment their ideas, based on the First Amendment. That is the one thing that I think has really held the United States up and separate from the other countries. I read about what's going on in Australia and England in particular, who we thought had some kind of freedom of speech, and yet they're arresting people over tweets and memes. And so I hope as well. I mean, resorting to violence to address violence is the wrong thing. We know that from Martin Luther King. We know that from Gandhi. We know that from Tolstoy. We know that from all the great thinkers about nonviolence, that violence breeds violence. And, and I think chaos also can result from that. And chaos does not benefit the people of this country. And I think the only people that benefit from chaos are elites who are very happy to drive divisions within the population and to create chaos from which they then can profit. And we need to be very, very aware of these, kind of overarching things that are going on. I don't care who it is who's speaking, whether I agree with them or not. I don't think anyone should be killed over their speech, period.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's been one of the hardest things, because there are things that people say they're false, that are wrong, that are lies, that are cruel, they're terrible, especially in the vaccine movement, the anti-vaxxer and the pro-vax movement. But even when I disagree with these people, I still agree with their right to say whatever they want.
Yeah. Well, and Charlie, I mean, in my case in particular, one of the cases that we have is the case against Pfizer for clinical trial fraud. And I do want to thank him, because he did put us on his platform. It's the clinical trial fraud over 2 years ago, very early on, in other words. And very few podcast platforms. There's a number of exceptions. Vaccine Safety Research Foundation is one, IMA is another, FLCCC, IMA, that they have focused on what happened to the population with the vaccine rollout. And Charlie was early on as a major podcaster to have a discussion about what we had learned through that lawsuit. So I have to thank him for his effort on that, and certainly the fact that he had very strong opinions. He had every right to be out here and discussing with people, with the public. And I think one of the things that I noticed is that he really let people say things to him.
Yeah.
He did really seem to listen, and and whether he agreed with the person who was bringing the message or not, he did seem to give them a chance instead of talking over them. And I think I appreciate that. I think we all really do, need to listen to people if we can, but certainly nobody should be silencing somebody else,
especially this way. I mean, I think part of it that affected me too was knowing that the chilling effect that this could have on the next generation of voices that would want to carry that torch. It could very easily discourage, Scott Adams said he would never do those things because he knew there was a risk to his life if he did them, like Charlie did.
Yeah.
And Charlie's bravery in marching into a den of lions over and over and over again. That was, I hope that we can replicate that times 10 million. Maybe that's going to be the fallout from his death.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think one of the things that we see is that, people can understand that, we do have to dissolve the fear of death in some of these processes. I mean, that's the teaching of the great nonviolent teachers that we've had, such as King, Gandhi, and Tolstoy. Is you have faith, and your faith itself helps you to override a fear that would stop you from participating in society, stop you from doing these things. And we are here on Earth in particular, I think, to sacrifice for our children. I mean, that's one of the problems of the whole vaccine rollout. We're saving the elderly to, by injecting the kids, supposedly. And that's something Charlie had certainly pointed out, is that, we're sacrificing our children to save people who are at the end of life. And that is just the opposite of what anybody should be doing. As a parent, as a grandparent, I fully intend that my life is available for sacrifice for my children and my grandchildren. And even in a broader scale, our lives are there to help protect our communities and our beyond our family even. And I think that Bobby Kennedy is an example of courage in that sense too. His family has this history of assassinations. They've had terrible tragedies. And yet here he is, out there in front, leading HHS, leading us, hopefully, he's trying to get us down a better pathway in every way, but he is absolutely 100% aware of the chance of assassination and the threats on his life. And so that kind of courage is something that I think we all need to, we all need to have faith in God, and that our lives will have meaning. And part of that is to have the courage to face, these dangers.
Right. I think that there are a lot of people in this country who have felt silenced. In fact, I just moments ago spoke with a contractor that came to work on our house, and when you talk to people, and especially if their normal peer group is silent or afraid to speak out or just keeps their head down or whatever, they just got to make a paycheck. They don't want to get involved. And then you find one of these people who is awake, but is so desperate to connect. And they find you, they don't want to stop talking. I mean, we almost missed this show because the guy was just like, it's like a breath of fresh air. I haven't had anyone that I could talk to about all these things. And it's like, that's what Charlie helped, pull out from these kids in school that were not allowed to speak publicly about how they felt. And then suddenly he showed them, hey, you are not alone. There's a huge peer group here that's willing to have these conversations. I hope that maybe the background of this is going to inspire more people to speak and connect and rekindle that patriotic, united spirit of America. You can see it in a lot of the vigils and things like that going on around the country.
Yeah. The one thing that I just worry about is, I think my primary concern is that there are people who want to meet violence with violence, and we absolutely cannot do that. We are put on earth, unfortunately, to sacrifice. And, if we understand that we're here to sacrifice, and we don't know the extent of that sacrifice exactly, but that's the key. And it is not to do harm to our fellow human beings. That's for sure. That will send you to hell to do that.
Well, retribution can come in many forms.
Yeah.
And not all are violent. In fact, I would say most aren't violent. When Donald Trump spoke about Charlie, he mentioned that they were going to start investigating the NGOs, the non-government organizations, that foster and provide a cradle for this sort of psychotic thought. And I'm very eager to support investigating those NGOs, because in our research and epidemic of fraud and helping Mary Talley Bowden, Dr. Bowden, find her attackers that were coordinating in private groups online that were fostered and funded by several different nonprofits. That kind of investigation, I think, is very much warranted. And let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the ways that nonprofits could be at risk for this type of behavior?
Well, I mean, and let's put one name out there in particular so people know. I mean, look at Arabella Funds, right?
Oh, I never thought of it.
it is a spider web of nonprofits feeding
Right.
other nonprofits, and
Yeah.
and USAID was part of this process as well. So
Right.
that's why USAID became a target, because it was involved in all kinds of relationships that fund basically ideologies that we are not open to in this country. I mean, you have the conversation, but we shouldn't be funding these ideologies with taxpayer funds. If a private individual wants to go down that line, that's one thing. But to have the U.S. taxpayer paying for things that are anathema to the United States, such as projects that actually suppress speech and attack people who have differing
Right.
views, that's my fear too. I don't want us to, I don't want to see speech, whether it's on the left or the right, be suppressed. I think that it all needs to be allowed and to come forward, and that we have a marketplace of free speech, and let the speech that is strongest, most honest, most truthful survive. And the others, I think it'll wither away in the sunlight. But to suppress it creates all kinds of very strange behaviors and very strange reactions among people. And go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, is allowing these organizations to operate as nonprofits, 501c3, is in a way that also allowing them to be funded by the government? Because the donors to these organizations, like Gates Foundation,
Yeah, they're not paying taxes on it, right? Of course,
they're not. They're bypassing taxation to support funds. So in a way, just by bypassing that taxation, the taxpayers who do pay taxes are footing a bigger bill of the pie that supports the government versus, Bill Gates, who said, "Hey, I got $80 billion. I don't want to give half of it to the government."
Well, almost any issue that we would look at, we're going to find NGOs behind it, and we're going to find nonprofit organizations. I mean, one of the things that concerned me, on elections, which I think everybody knows, is Mark Zuckerberg's influence over all the boards of elections throughout the country. And I think
$400 million, right?
Yeah, $400 million went into that. And that was not, that's an interference that is completely unwarranted. Our local boards of elections should be responsive to our local people. We have a Summit County Board of Elections here in my county. Those members are appointed to that board from each party. The governor has a role. The Secretary of State has a role. And, to have a third party then come in and have access to the machinery of a local boards of elections is really a violation of our expectation that elections will be publicly, openly, and observably run, and that they are funded by the taxpayer in a way that is non-ideological, that the different sides and the different candidates, are all have an equal chance and are treated fairly by those boards of elections. And the interference by Mark Zuckerberg, for example, I think was horrendous and actually did have a big impact in a number of election years.
So Zuckerberg didn't do it through a nonprofit, did he? He did it through his for-profit company.
Honestly, I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure of that. I think there was a nonprofit involved in that, because it was ostensibly was not a partisan thing. It was just an election support thing.
Right.
So we could look that up real quick on the web if you want, but it was just about election support supposedly, but we know that broke along partisan lines as well.
Well, you find that the people that run most of the election offices are Democrats, or...
Well, I can explain this. I mean, I've had a lot of experience with this.
Oh, please do.
Basically, your local board of election is supposed to be split between the two parties. So you should have equal representation, at least we do here, of the Democrat and Republican Party. I know there are concerns in some of the Democratic areas that what was happening, especially under Zuckerberg's effort, was to enhance the participation in the election itself in those Democratic areas to boost the Democratic turnout. But ostensibly, the elections boards themselves were 50-50, equally weighted toward Republicans as Democrats. But we know that in some jurisdictions, it may not be working quite that way. So,
Well, like in the state of Georgia, the Board of Elections has submitted requests, I believe, to Fulton County for election materials, ballots, things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll just do a quick check. Fulton County's just ignored them. Let me see. Board of Elections. Judge, 3 weeks ago, judge orders daily fines after Fulton commissioners refuse to see GOP election board picks.
okay, well, that is a violation then, and that's probably because they're mandated to have equal representation. And the board is not going to get away with that. I can tell you that.
Well, the thing that you find is that Fulton County just seems to operate on its own government. They don't care. They violate all kinds of laws. I mean, if you look at the Ahmaud Arbery murder, I believe the prosecutors came from Fulton County, and it was a different county in a different part of the state. Not that that's. It was just very curious how they were operating, and people were asking questions, and no one cared about the answers. There's nothing in this statute to support the BOC theory that the county commissioners can veto the chairperson's nominees other than for failure of the nominee to meet the 2 qualifications and 1 restriction. The board has just, I don't know, why aren't they arresting Fulton County officials? They're paying $10,000 a day for not appointing Republican election board nominees.
Well, again, I mean, the reason it's before a judge and before a court is they're mandated to appoint those officials. And that's why this $10,000 fine or this $10,000 penalty per day is taking place. They are mandated to do it. If they're not doing it, they're simply not doing their job. What I would look for at that point is that, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State of Georgia, the Governor of Georgia, I mean, they should get involved because this is law breaking, basically.
The county wants to ensure Georgia Election Board can appoint election denialists. What a strange headline from The Guardian. Or a subtitle, right?
Yeah.
Denialists?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, I remember Hillary Clinton being a denialist in 2016. They thought that the election was skewed toward Trump. They were very ungracious in his victory in 2016. They claimed that there was Russian interference that back then in the election. So denialism cuts both ways. But these boards of elections have state law that they have to follow, and the Attorney General for Georgia ought to get involved in this and get them straight very quickly.
And that's problematic too, because I don't understand why Kemp has allowed so much to occur under his watch. I spoke to a local county board of election head in 2021, and he told me that they were not checking voter signatures. Mm-hmm. They didn't check for IDs. He told me that they did not do anything that could verify. In fact, the only way they were confirming people were dead was they would go to obituary.com.
Oh, geez.
And that's how we learned how the master death file wasn't properly being updated by states' data, with the Social Security Administration. All these little fun seeds that were planted under Obama's administration have come to grow into very dark fruited trees. Evil, if you want to think about it like that.
Yeah, well, it is very frustrating as a lawyer to deal with this, because the Help America Vote Act is being violated all over the place. Whether you agree with that statute or not, we need to be able to enforce that statute. And the other thing, even state laws are being ignored. One of the things that we tried to litigate in Ohio is that there was a requirement that the counting of the votes actually be observable. And, that stemmed back from when you had ballots that were actually hand counted. Right. And that's where that law came from. And no longer is that happening. It's going through what I'd call a black box, where they're fed into a machine. The machine's doing the counting. You can't observe what's happening. So we tried to challenge that and say, at a very basic level, this is a long time ago, by the way, but we tried to say, look, you can't use the black boxes. You have to actually count those ballots by hand and verify them by hand. And the beauty of that is that the count actually remains local for each county. And then that is reported to the state. Instead of everything being fed from the counties into a big computer that then tallies them statewide, it's counted locally. You have a lot more checks and balances in the system. So, I'm definitely an advocate for hand counted in-person paper ballot voting. And we have to meet what the original requirements were, that these be observable counts. There are many countries that do have observable counts, and we need to just reinstate that. I am particularly concerned about computers, the ability to program them, the ability to put algorithms in there, the ability now of AI to potentially adjust those votes in a way that we won't see. So we have to get away from computers at this point, given what's happening to our world. There are some things that need to stay exclusively in the human realm, and voting is certainly one of those.
Do you think that by the lack of any sort of criminal enforcement for voter malfeasance, and maybe that's, like the fight between Fulton
Let's talk language for a minute here, okay? I don't like the word voter malfeasance or voter fraud very much, because first of all, voters do commit fraud. They'll vote in multiple places, and they do get charged criminally. What we're really dealing with now is something that I would classify as election fraud. Okay. It is because of the elections becoming centralized instead of decentralized that we have what I consider to be massive election fraud. That's manipulation of the machines. That's manipulation of the counts. That's manipulation of the absentee ballots. That's the problems with the, unobserved ballot boxes that you can just drop a bunch of ballots in. That's the mules that are going out and collecting ballots, and who God knows what's going on there to get people to vote a certain way. Essentially, the way the politicians think about it is we're voting those people, not that those people are voting. So I consider, so let's make that distinction between voter fraud, which does happen and actually has been prosecuted, to election fraud, which we have had very little ability to address. Many of the lawsuits on the Trump election, were thrown out. Not all of them, by the way. A friend of mine was successful on a ballot box issue up in Wisconsin, Joe Boyland, who's a great lawyer. But that's one of the very few success stories in post 2020 election. But
I guess when I say malfeasance, when I think of election fraud, I think of fakery, right? Or deception.
There is manipulation, that fakery, deception. There's
with malfeasance. Yeah. I guess what I mean by that is a more broader scope of not necessarily election fraud, which would be to twist an election, but also just a refusal to obey the law.
Right.
And that's what's happening in Fulton County, and that's what's happening in many counties all across the nation. Yeah. Do you think that first of all, is it a federal crime?
Well, no, elections are generally run by the states, but there are plenty of state laws that can be brought to bear and should be brought to bear, including in the case that you're talking about, contempt of court. There can be both civil and criminal contempt of court. So right now there's apparently a civil contempt where they're fining them, but there can be a criminal contempt of court where you actually jail the people who are in contempt of a judge's orders. So the contempt of court process is something that should be enforced.
So who investigates those crimes in each state? And like, say, the state of Georgia, would it be the GBI? California, who is the investigator? Is it an attorney general?
Well, each state is somewhat different in terms of how they run it. It certainly could be an attorney general. I know in Ohio, we've actually had our highway patrol investigating some issues. I know that personally. So, we have an Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. It sounds like Georgia has a Bureau of Criminal Investigation as well. So whatever the structure is, and we should learn what those structures are.
Sure.
It is different state by state, but there is an enforcement process in every state, and there are very clear laws in every state, both to address election fraud and to address malfeasance by boards of elections. We had a very unfortunate situation here. This is actually the Democrats were concerned about the election in 2004. And the Delaware County Board of Elections, instead of holding on to the ballots for 2 years, destroyed them. And there was actually an order by a federal judge in that case, because it's a violation of your civil rights to mess up an election. That's where where the federal power may come in. And the Delaware Board of Elections basically ignored the order and destroyed the ballots. Now, that judge chose not to have harsh penalties on that, but absolutely, I believe there should have been some harsh penalties paid.
There's a new act presented by a Florida representative today called the Jail Act, which is about punishing judges who give light sentences for significant crimes and criminals, like the one that killed the Ukrainian woman on the subway last week. Do we need something like that? Because the judiciary seems to be almost unfunctional in terms of doing the right thing in almost every case. I'm very sorry to say it, but not all. But they're not punishing crime. They're soft on criminals. They release really violent criminals, and Americans are suffering for it. Do we need something like that to push judges to have mandatory minimum sentences?
I'm going to give you an answer that is maybe not what you expect. First of all, we have this balance between legislative, executive, and judicial power, and we need to have judicial independence for lots of reasons. So we may be, judicial independence may have some outcomes that we don't like, but we actually can redress that politically through how judges are appointed. In my county, we have elected judges, so they're directly responsible to the people. You can directly confront them. They're on the campaign trail. You can confront them about and over their decisions. You can force them to explain those decisions. Now, if a governor is appointing a judge, for example, that governor needs to be held accountable for who they're appointing. And even in those states where they're appointed, a lot of times there's it's not a recall, but you can vote on the appointed judge. It's a retention vote sometimes. So vote against the retention. So we do need to pay attention as a people. We need to stay vigilant. That's the price of liberty. So we need to stay vigilant as to what's happening in our judiciary, and in our executive and legislative branches. But no, I am not for. I think that the independent judiciary has been actually critical. It's been critical to us in this COVID fight. The judges and the courts have been, they've been very good. They have restored and reinforced religious liberty. They have backed down the executive's orders that Biden entered, having mandates for federal contractors and OSHA. We did have a problem with the Medicare, Medicaid mandate, the CMS mandate. And I think some of that was, I don't think the judges understood that. I mean, you can see in the Supreme Court argument, especially Judge Sotomayor, she had no idea about how COVID worked, how deadly or not deadly it actually was. And she had the numbers all wrong. That there is an element of education there, and we need to be concerned when judges are not aware of facts, when they're not aware that this is really not a vaccine. We've had to fight and overcome all these hurdles. But again, back to my point, in general, without an independent judiciary, we would not be where we are today, which is way better than what it was looking like back in 2020.
Right. Well, I'm just curious, like if you don't have enforcement for election malfeasance, it emboldens the people behind it to continue to do it, and
Mhm.
maybe even go further. Without boundaries, everything goes really wrong really fast, and we're experiencing that. Do you see Do you see any hope in this area?
Of course I do. I'm a very hopeful guy. But I mean, what's the issue why everybody got kicked out of court basically? It was most of the cases lost not on the merits of the case. They lost on standing. I'm talking specifically about the aftermath of the 2020 election.
Mhm.
So they did not lose on the merits. It's a standing issue. So that is actually solvable legislatively to give voters standing to bring challenges, and to set the parameters for those challenges and understand how standing was used to against people who were concerned about what was happening in our boards of elections. So that could be addressed at the state level. It could also be addressed at the federal level to give the citizens standing to sue. We had a couple of cases. I mean, we actually did an amicus brief on the Colorado situation with Trump, where they tried to remove him from the ballot, and that was
Right.
ultimately a successful case. And then we had a case called the Jerusalem case at the Supreme Court as well, that we were asking for the court to take the case up to really to address the issue of what happens when voters are disenfranchised through these processes that we've seen happen at the boards of elections, and they refuse to take that one up. But I have that briefing if anybody wants to see it. But it's those standing issues that need to be addressed, which can happen legislatively. So let's understand that process.
Do you think that some judges use standing as an excuse to pass the buck?
Of course they
And
do. Yeah.
and and why is that?
Well, these are politically fraught cases. Judges, it puts them in the crucible of the fight. And I think many judges want to avoid that if they can. And they've been able to justify it in terms of the way things have been structured in our case law so far. But I think that can change. I can tell you right now that my office is working on a HAVA complaint, and we hope to establish standing on that case. But this is far from over. And the other thing is simply this: people wake up. Our elections have gotten a bit out of control.
Right.
And there's simple processes, just like what we started out with. Just get this back to operating on the human level and not at the computer level. And I think we can restore a lot of integrity that way. I mean, there's always going to be ballot stuffing and problems around the margins. But if it's a human level, non-centralized issue, if we make sure that the decentralized nature of what our elections used to be is restored, it has a limit to it. Now,
Right.
the way that things have been centralized and computerized, they're just huge, massive issues that come into play.
Yeah, the election process it needs a lot of love, and I hope we're going to get it. And I'm grateful that you and the team at Freedom Council are working on it.
Yeah.
I wanted to wrap this up by going back to the NGOs and looking at them from, President Trump essentially lost an adopted son last week.
Mm.
And he's very angry, and he wants to come after, I'm sure, many of these NGOs that foster the kind of environments that create people like the man who allegedly assassinated Charlie Kirk. Did I say that right, counselor?
Yes. Yes, you did. I don't
To
think
that
we're going to have
end,
to worry about a defamation lawsuit on that one anyway.
so to that end, with the tools that the president has, where are these NGOs weak? What is their soft spot? What would you say would be a way that they could be defanged?
Well, I think many of the NGOs are weak in the fact that they are actually operating in a partisan manner. And I think that goes to the ideologies we discussed earlier. But I think that that is an essential Achilles heel for all of them. You know, are they clearly biased? Are they operating in a partisan manner? Are they benefiting one party over another? You know, what's actually happening there? So I think there's lots of arguments that can be made. You know, and let's start at the top. I mean, Bill Gates has used his nonprofit to carry out all kinds of dastardly deeds around the world, and push agendas, depopulation agendas, I believe, that are driven through vaccination. And
Right.
we've seen the horrific situation in Kenya that occurred, where the tetanus vaccine was being given, and it was laced with something that would sterilize the women who took it. I think you're aware of that
Right.
situation. So you know, let's pay attention to what they're actually doing, and let's start at the top. Let's rank order the NGOs, and start at the top and see what the impact of them has been, and investigate them. There's tens of thousands of these entities out there, and there is really, in my view, no effective control in place in terms of their activities.
Do you think that there's a way to have their tax exempt status revoked?
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the political activities are the Achilles heel of the NGO. And the
Now,
fact,
how responsive is the IRS? I mean, do you do it at the state level or do you do it at the federal level?
well, anyone can file what's called a Form 211 if they have actual information. I think that I think that that's a good thing to have an attorney review. So I'll do a little bit of a pitch for the attorneys at Freedom Council. If you think that you know about an NGO that's working in a partisan way, favoring one party over another, you know, and sometimes very explicitly, you can bring a complaint. And you know, but have an attorney review that, help you file the IRS form, document what's going on, and get it filed. And like I said, we've got over 250 attorneys at Freedom Council. Many of them would be interested in reviewing the potential filing.
So it sounds like what you're saying is we need to create some sort of landing spot on freedomcouncil.org
Yeah, that's a good idea.
to apply for representation for your NGO Form 211 complaint.
Yep, it's called
I
Form
think
211.
that's brilliant, Warner. It sounds like a good idea.
There's it's not just my idea, it's many people's idea. The IRS set up a whistleblower office
Sure.
a long time ago, and I will say one of the things about their whistleblower office, I have actually filed a number of these for the last 20 years. I have been very disappointed, President Trump, in how that whistleblower office has responded to what we believe are clear violations of the tax code.
Well,
So we need to, that whistleblower office needs to take these complaints seriously. And when I, as an attorney, submit something on behalf of my client, you know, at some point they ought to give us a call back. We've had very little communication, you know, with the whistleblower complaints that we filed with the IRS.
I mean, imagine that because I'm familiar with this a little bit through William Scott's complaint against Gates Foundation. He's filed a Form 211, and the judges run from it. They don't want to touch it. The IRS doesn't want to touch it. The Department of Treasury doesn't. Like, everyone's running from this. I mean, imagine you're a rather young AUSA, and this is like your first job out of school or whatever. This is not the fight that you even would ever want to consider ever going after. Who wants to be the 24-year-old who kills their career by trying to revoke Gates Foundation's status?
Well, that should not be in the hands of a young attorney. I mean, what you need is an attorney that has had long experience with the government, maybe experience in private practice. Let's bring some of them back into government practice to do this exact thing. You know, for example, you know, the older attorneys are, you know, I'm not looking to go anywhere. I'm 63 years old. There's
63 years young, sir.
There's no fame or fortune necessarily in my future that I care about. I've got a good life. I've got a good family. I'm happy. So these are the types of guys who you can bring in. And the word I'll use, the word of the hour is sacrifice. They would, these older attorneys, I think, would be willing to, be on the front lines. They're knowledgeable. They have long experience, and they can go after these things as conspiracies, as RICOs, the Racketeering and Corrupt Organization Statute. They can go at these under the IRS, and there's nothing that can be taken from them because there's nothing that they need. And I think those are, so there is, as we go through our lives, I've seen this among the doctors as well. Many of the doctors who objected to the COVID shots and things like that, they threw themselves, down as a sacrifice. I mean, think of Dr. Thorpe. I mean, so it's a lot of these doctors are more toward the end of their careers with less to prove and nothing to gain, and they're willing to step forward. Dr. Lee Vliet with Truth for Health Foundation, for example, same thing. I could probably think of a whole line, and I'm forgetting some of the great heroic doctors that have stepped up to defend their profession. But it's the same way with lawyers. We need the lawyers who are maybe at the end of their careers, but are willing to step up and do the work, and certainly maybe to go back into government to wrap up some of these problems.
That's actually a good thing that you just pointed out. We need patriotic people to pursue roles in the government again.
Right.
We got to wrest back this because it has been fully dominated. I mean, over the weekend, O'Keefe released a secret recording of someone from FEMA, from a subset of FEMA, that was calling it Kirk's assassination laughable. I think was what he said. It's hard not to laugh at this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what you're actually referring to.
Go look at O'Keefe Media Group's post yesterday. This is just the kind of sick stuff that is coming out of people from the government that get hired. And I think if you trace it, it starts by having people in HR, all having a similar mentality. And then from there, using DEI policies to continue to seed only their ideology throughout other hired slots and other areas of the government, to the point then when it becomes an echo chamber that has no idea of the people they govern and what they actually think and feel. I mean, this is a consistent thing. So, but if we can get people, maybe that's something Trump needs to work on. Trump needs to fire all the HR managers and bring in Turning Point USA recent graduates into those roles. What would happen to the government then?
Again, let's not make this, let's not make this partisan in a sense that.
Turning Point was a nonprofit.
Yeah, I think that you do need people with experience, but you need people with human experience that are not going to look at things through these ideological lenses. We need to get back, and the other thing that we need to do, obviously, the federal government, the size of the federal government has been a huge problem. Right now, 80 million people that at work in this country have some linkage to a federal contract. That's why Biden was able to, think that he could get away with an executive order regarding federal contractors and mandates. He didn't, thank God, but that's the kind of coercive process that is happening now because of the size of the federal government. So we really need to look at it. We need to spin things out to the periphery, back out to the edge, decentralize, localize everything we can, from healthcare to food to elections to education. Everything needs to be decentralized as much as we can and rehumanized. Agreed.
So I'm going to put this up on the screen because we said it. So now we have to do it. For anyone who wants more information, and give us a little time to put it together, but go to Freedom. Nope, that's the wrong thing. Go to freedomcouncil.org. Give us maybe a day. But I think if, let's say you are a person that works for a nonprofit organization that has been doing stuff that you know is wrong,
Yeah.
and you want to come forward as a whistleblower, can I ask, are you able to as an attorney that represents someone, are you able to represent a whistleblower anonymously to the IRS?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
At
Yeah.
what point do they become unmasked?
Well, they actually don't become unmasked. If you want
Really?
to retain anonymity, you can retain your anonymity in the process.
Well, that's lovely.
Yes, it is, isn't it? So, we have a way to do this. And I'm going to throw one other thing out there is that many of these NGOs are working with federal dollars directly and federal grants. And we have reviewed many, many cases where the federal grant money is being misused. It's applied for one thing and it's used for another. Those are other things that can be brought forward. And again, I recommend, you don't have to use a lawyer, but I recommend having a lawyer look at it and help you structure how you're going to make your presentation, whether it's to the IRS or to a U.S. attorney or whatever. So we have a bunch of attorneys now who are willing to do that and are open to your ideas in this space. I mean, your ideas meaning the audience. So
if you're a whistleblower, or if you are an employee that has knowledge of a nonprofit behaving in a way that you felt was partisan, you can report them to the IRS. And by the way, doesn't the IRS pay whistleblowers if they backdate taxes and get money from the organization?
They do. There are whistleblower rewards available as well for people who bring forward the information. And there's a range of award out there depending on what the complaint is, how you filed it. I would say that the Form 211, there are non-Form 211 processes, but I would say the Form 211 process sets you up very well for the award and gives you a way to kind of track what's happening, at least a limited ability to track it. Like I said, I'm very disappointed with the IRS in terms of how it communicates the information back to us or gives us feedback on what we've submitted. But
Gotcha.
nevertheless,
well, there may be more interest in pursuing those kinds of cases now.
Yeah.
So if a whistleblower comes forward to you, what would be some good advice? I would suggest personally that you go and get a free Proton Mail account. And be aware that Proton Mail accounts, when the subject data is not secure, the body data is secure. So keep your subject simple, not overly specific. We'll put up an email address. I mean, I think there's a contact address on the freedomcouncil.org website right now.
There is.
That can be used.
Yes, there is. And there's some secure forms as well that you can fill out right now.
And what kind of evidence is the best evidence for a whistleblower to bring?
Well, any whistleblower really needs to get documentation. It's the documentation, it's emails, it's the, a lot of whistleblowers are able to actually bring the accounting and Excel spreadsheet. They can show us where stuff is going. They can bring us the budgets. They can bring us the grant forms if it's a grant fraud issue. So
what about emails? Let's say you've got emails from a head of an NGO saying, "Oh, let's get these ex political people." Does that help at all? Just to set a motive?
Of course it does. Emails are going to be a great source of information. And if you're worried about tracking at your place of work in terms of what you're printing or downloading or forwarding even, just take pictures, take screenshots of it. I would use a phone, take a screenshot and send that out.
Your iPhone, if you open the Notes app in the iPhone, you can scan documents in with your camera.
Yeah.
Which creates PDFs. It's really, really fun and easy, and it will, if you're skewed or you're angled off a little bit, it'll fix that. These are all very useful pieces of information for whistleblowers, but please come forward. Hey, you might get some payday out of this too. Like, look, $80 billion at Gates Foundation. Imagine if they had to go back to, say, 2017 and start paying taxes.
Yeah. And you get 10% or something of that. I mean, it would be a good day.
that would not be a bad day for sure. I would be okay with that if that were me, but that's obviously not me. Well, Warner, this has been very illuminating. Again, our hearts go out to the Kirk family and all of the people who loved him, and we are very sad about it, but we're going to carry on. And thank you for everything, Warner. And next week, we'll be a little bit more buttoned down, maybe even have a thumbnail.
I can't even believe an hour went by. How did we just talk for an hour?
I can talk to a rock for 2 hours.
Are you calling me a rock?
No, you are kind of a rock, but not in the bad way.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. We will see you next week, Mondays at 2 p.m.
Thank you. See you, man.